I'm Jim Collison and live from our virtual studios around the world. This is Gallup's Called the Coach, recorded on May 26th, 2021. Called the Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. Mike, I'll say that forever and be able to repeat that for the rest of my life. If you're listening live, join us in the chat room. The link is just right above me on our live page, and go to YouTube, sign in with your Google account, and join us there. If you're listening after the fact, and many of you do, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to subscribe to Called the Coach on your favorite podcast app or there on YouTube so you never miss an episode. Dr. Mike McDonald is our host today. He works as a senior workplace consultant, also doubles as my best friend at work. Mike, always good to have you on Called the Coach. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I would have been here either way. Whether you invited me or not, I probably would have shown up. So thanks for the opportunity.
You bet. We got the opportunity this morning. I was just randomly on a Clubhouse. This is kind of this new app where you can just jump in. It's like radio shows. You can talk. They invite you in. And they were talking about Q12 this morning, and it was a great opportunity. They were wrapping up their Q12 kind of series. They had done one question a week for the last 12 weeks, which kind of, I'll remind folks, we've got 12 episodes and really 14 total we think about an intro and an outro to our Q12 for Coaches series. So if you go to YouTube and search Q12 for Coaches, Mike and I put a whole series together about 3 years ago to really intro you to this. By the way, Mike, that book, First Break All the Rules, that code is in, eventually we're going to phase that code out. So folks, that those 10 free seats that were a part of that's going to be on a limited time. So if you're thinking about doing that, you might want to act on it pretty quickly here. But we put the series together to kind of think about that. Today, Mike, we wrap this 4-part series, which I consider kind of a lid on that 12 or on those 14-part series. We talked about the mechanics of it. Then we spent some time talking about managers because we know how influential managers are in this equation of engagement. And so, Mike, let's go back. We've got that series. What else? What else is kind of the textbooks for us during this?
Yeah, Jim. We've been working over 3 specific points of content that I'd love to just keep reminding our group of. It's the Manager book. I think a couple of us have heard about that. Here's the themes that you'll hear through each of these 3 points of reference or points of content is just continually translating research to action or thought to action. It's really the bias that we all lead with as coaches. I guess if there's a healthy bias, I would hope that it's that one. But that's what It's the Manager does. It's one thing to have really powerful research, but the book then extends, and it's almost a manual, I guess. It's your owner operator manual, Jim, to how do we understand the mechanics, the opportunities, the features of the best of managers in a way that truly moves an organization forward on a variety of levels. And I love it because on a couple of scales, it strips away a lot of myths and stereotypes that I think have been held on far too long about the way the world and the workplace is genuinely motivated. So what I love about this audience is it's in tune and pursuing that as much as any. So the It's the Manager book is a tremendous point of reference, and that's our attempt, is to operationalize that book in our conversation. Our Well-Being at Work book, Jim, love when you talk about a lid. I love the latest, greatest evolution of that as well. Just came out here in the last couple of weeks. Dr. Jim Harder, Gallup CEO Jim Clifton, co-wrote that book. A high-level perspective, much in the same vein as It's the Manager, but translating a construct which again could be incredibly nebulous. Around well-being could mean a million things to a million people. What does it actually mean? How do we lead through it at the organization level? How does it translate and change the way we talk about well-being so that we have a better life? And I'll take it to a one closer point of perspective. I think it's really worth our time. And again, as a point of reference, but if you go to Gallup.com, there is an article that I think we should all be very familiar with. It is the Well-Being Engagement Paradox of 2020. And in that article, we see a lot of great interactions and dynamics between engagement and well-being, but primarily this paradox is for the first time in history, Jim, or at least the first time in Gallup measurement, we saw well-being decrease and engagement increase. Those two have always had a very favorable relationship to each other. It's the first time that we saw them separate. A divergent relationship, I think is what we would say, Jim. So anyway, those are 3 points of reference that kind of guide the thought in our conversation. Would encourage all of you to be pursuing or thinking about what those 3 can bring to your own coaching.
Mike, we are talking about managers of managers today. As we wrap up the series, we talked about the current state. We talked about perks and challenges, and today we talk about the manager of managers. And I have a little passion for this. This is a topic I've been hard on managers of managers over the last couple of years, because I feel like oftentimes we see managers who get maybe promoted, if that's the word we want to use. They get additional responsibilities to be a VP or whatever. And they kind of forget that they're still managers. They think they've, I don't want to say they think they've arrived, but they should certainly have a lot of pressure moving into an executive role or into a VP role, or however that lays out inside organizations. And they forget their fundamental job is still to manage people. They have managers underneath them in some cases, or in most cases. And they forget about that. And I kind of want to spend this session a little bit talking about the importance of our coaches in thinking about how important, because many of you coaches are reaching the executive level or that level of leaders. And we need to, that, like, they have if we say 70% of engagement is kind of tied to the manager at that level, I think it could be more. And so it's really, really important they don't forget they are managers. They are still managers. And so, Mike, as we kind of go through this for our coaches, I want to encourage you, pull from this and help your executives, help your vice presidents, help your whatever, senior VPs, understand how to continue to lead from a people standpoint. So with that, Mike, get us started.
Couldn't agree more. So Jim, a couple things as we'll take that conversation on in. So let's think about this. We always like to start off with our framework: the empirical, the emotional, and the experiential. And so a couple of data points I think that really hold us accountable, Jim. When you talk about opening up the perspective of those senior leaders and the why it's so necessary for them to be actively mindful of the managers who report to them, there's a couple of things that really open our eyes. One is that we know that engaged leaders, right, those leaders who model, demonstrate all the behaviors, all the interactions of being engaged themselves, increase the likelihood of the managers who report to them to be engaged by 39%. That's a pretty powerful number. That's a strong lift. The news gets even better, Jim, because the cascade influence of that, as we call it, is that teams that are led by engaged managers are 59% more likely to be engaged themselves. So what I love for this is I want to be fair to leaders relative to managers, because I do think for leaders, I think they make assumptions, and I love how our coaching moves us past assumptions, but I think they think that, managers, if you're a manager, you're probably okay. Maybe you, to your point, the managers who report to me as a leader have arrived and maybe they don't need those developmental conversations, or they don't, they start to make assumptions that remove their efforts somewhere else. And so the accountability though around that data, 39% and 59%, if I'm a leader, what I should be thinking about is we can reach every associate in our organization. If I don't have to do 1,000 skip level meetings, but we can reach every associate in our organization if I engage the managers who report to me. I can literally put my finger on the culture of our entire organization if any managers who report to me as a senior leader are categorically engaged, and just watch the transmission of our culture take itself forward that way. So I really get excited about that. The other thing too, Jim, and I think there's business level accountability here. Just one point of reference. This just came from a conversation I had with an organization yesterday. But when you look at that chain reaction of engagement, and we think about some of the other perspectives of accountability around how an organization wins through its managers or loses through its managers, we know that 51% of the people who voluntarily left their organization did so to get away from their manager. Jim, I'm leaving, and I'm running from leaving Gallup, and it's to get away from you. right? Like I just think about the decision that I'm making. I would risk unemployment and having to find a whole new job that may or may not be better than the one I have, but my manager is so bad that I'm willing to entertain all of those thoughts and go into the unknown. And so here's where it really hammers its point is organization I was talking to yesterday, they annualized their turnover cost, Jim, $460 million annualized turnover cost. Like I almost had to have him repeat it. Now I'm sorry. I'm like, are you saying 4 to 6? Are you saying somewhere between 4 and 6 million? They're like $460 million annualized turnover cost. And so you take it back, bad manager. What do we get 50% of that back? What if it was more, just based on leaders engaging their managers and setting up that chain reaction of talent retention there? So
anyway. I think there's another number too, 1.5 times the annual salary of the individuals who's left to replace them.
Yeah.
And so when we think about those costs escalating fast, Mike, I also think about the levels of disengagement. Dr. Jim Harder, who you mentioned earlier, is part of our research team and wrote the book Wellbeing at Work. He has said the most maligned group in an organization right now are those frontline managers, the first level managers. They're stuck. They're literally caught between a rock and a hard place because they have disgruntlement with their staff, with their employees, with their go-tos, as we would call it at Gallup, and they're getting no support from their leadership above. And so sometimes we're hard on them at this level, and it's not always their fault because they're stuck in the middle here. And I think we're seeing now a great migration of managers. So I see a lot of folks who are managing in organizations through the pandemic and are like, I'm out. I am checking out. Well, guess what happens? So now you have a manager of managers who wasn't managing the managers. They're not going to be in a position to manage those people who were like being managed by someone else, right? And so it's critical, right? That we begin to address this.
Yeah, no, it is. It's and again, 2020. If we redeem the year and the lessons that were learned, the assumptions that got stripped away or the assumptions that got confirmed, there was a lot of unvarnished perspective, I think, about what the year revealed to us, and it was exactly the point that you just made, Jim. And so for the audience, one of the things I would love to have you think about when you think about consider the interactions of senior leaders to the managers who report to them is we talked about this just a little bit in our first discussion, Jim, but I've been waiting, kind of restraining myself because I really wanted to unpack it here. But help those senior leaders think about two primary words, okay? Endorse and advocate. And think about how those words wrap themselves around that frontline supervisor, Jim, or any mid-level manager, any group or population that would report to a leader in the organization who actually leads a team themselves. And here's where we would see the misfire. Okay, so we'll use 2020 as a convenient example. And whether it's 2020, it's I think the case is always going to be made. But here's what will happen: is most organizations had to make some pretty tough but necessary decisions. Right, some were really hard in terms of like, well, we just lost 90% of our client base. Right, or some were hard in the fact that we're growing at a rapid rate. In a weird way, we're actually benefiting, right? We know that there were some industries that actually benefited from some of the change and disruption of 2020, but that growth now challenges because how do we onboard people virtually because none of us can go on site? Or how do we address and meaningfully create work from home policies that keep our culture and our organization intact, even though we're still trying to add value to clients and all a million different perspectives. And so any of these decisions the organization has to make to keep their viable, sustainable future open and in front of them. And if you think about this, so we can send out organization level emails that communicate that. We could put that content out in newsletters. We could have our CEO or senior level exec, talk about it at a town hall. I don't think those forms of information or communication are going to change engagement or change behavior or decision making on the receiving end. I think they'll contribute to it, but the most powerful way we're going to change the reception for every associate is how does that form of communication, that endorsement of that tough but necessary decision, how actively and how local can it be created in the conversation between a team leader and their team, one-on-one or at a team level. So think about this, Jim. Let's just say that we're changing our benefits package at Gallup. And certainly, I'm going to get some great information from our terrific department here at Gallup, and they'll tell us all the mechanics and the technical details. But Jim, if you're my manager, are you having a parallel conversation locally that helps me to feel confident, secure, and that I have access to the right experts and resources so I can meaningfully make the right decision on behalf of my family? Can you connect that dot for me, Jim? Or maybe, Jim, maybe you're kind of frustrated yourself, right? We have a disconnect between your leader who is supposed to be engaging you as a manager and there's some open space and you don't really understand the why behind the decision. You don't know if you really buy into it and believe in it. So Jim, when you do have that conversation with me, there's going to be no endorsement. I can pick up on, I'm emotionally astute enough. I'll pick up on the fact, I don't think my manager actually, I don't know. I think he's just passing content along, moving words around, but I'm not sure. I definitely know I'm not engaged in the process now. And actually, maybe I've lost a little trust in the organization. Now, maybe I'm starting to, so all these things can unfold, but we have to think about our local team leaders' capacity. And we're not out of threat or coercion, but honestly, out of coaching. That, Jim, do you understand it enough? Is there something else that could be supplied to you as a manager from your leader enough to where that does connect now and change the interactions that you have with me as a team member? So now I can be wildly engaged. It can be a very tough and difficult decision. A lot of organizations did that, but we saw a lot of organizations, Jim, that actually moved engagement forward because the integrity of that interaction was so strong. Yes, I know it's tough and necessary, but guess what? You valued me. You brought me into part as part of the process. I have a choice about how I receive it. And it does set us up, and I understand the why behind how our success is going to be predicted futuristically. So I think that endorsed piece, and I'll pause there. I think that's we just can't miss the mark on that. And I think we're making assumptions about our local leaders' capacity to deliver that message effectively.
We had Matt Mosser, who's both the manager for you and me, on here talking about communication just a few weeks ago. And Mike, I'm always reminded when we sit in our meetings with him and we know we have to deliver some tough news and we get to have this discussion as a team. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do it consistently? How are we going to do it the same across all our teams, but individualize it both by team and by person to make sure it lands correctly? And I see a lot of coaching in those conversations. Doesn't always just come from that. I think we as managers spend time with each other, coaching each other. I think that's been the value I've found in the relationship with you oftentimes is the coaching that I get from you in some of these things that we have to do, right? And I think the power of the management team is to be able to have those conversations. I think that's one of those areas that we miss in coaching is as part of a management team, we've got everybody's in the same place and we've got this ability to coach each other and be coached from our manager in it. Mike, what else as we think about that scenario? So now we have a management team and a manager of managers. The value in that is the team coming together in communication and talking about what else is there available.
Well, that's a great perspective. So when we think about that extension, and you're really right about that dynamic, imagine a leader having that conversation with the managers collectively who report to them. It does take pressure off the leader, right? Because now we get a bit of a crowdsourced mentality around it. But there's something about that identity, Jim, and about that shared struggle and that shared success. That when you think about our real life example, when we're in those manager meetings with Matt Mosser, he facilitates those conversations, brings some really strong points to the discussion, but we then kind of supply each other with what our thought is, how do we organize and cohesively, and I think that's the important piece to it, that now cohesively we're unified around and agreed upon the why, so that Jim, when you go back to your team, is consistent aligned with what I'm sharing with my team, right? So we can come together, challenge, add, but at the end of it all, we've unified our culture. And now despite our delivery, everyone's and think about the trust factor, think about the exchange. So Jim, when somebody on your team talks to somebody on my team and they can compare notes, they've heard the same things. Boy, that really boosts our confidence. We know our organization is really tight. It's very intact and committed to that decision. And so it's an important emotional and psychological level of stability for our organizations to navigate change and disruption.
Yeah, well, and I think it's a little bit of a healing balm or salve for a team, right? For everyone knowing going out of this, if we have to make difficult decisions or even great decisions that are made, right? That everybody's on the same page. Hey, at least on this team, we're all on the same page moving forward. I think that's an intentional communication strategy that has to be implemented, and space has to be allowed for that. We have to find time, right, to be able to get together. Matt mentioned, we get together on a weekly basis. It doesn't happen all the time, but when it's more when it needs to be, it's less when it doesn't need to be. But to get that time for us to communicate, which is super important, and for the truth to be spoken, you and I talked about this a little bit in pre-show, for the truth to be spoken in, so that we know we're not guessing, right? We're not doing that. I think managers of managers sometimes are afraid. They get to this spot where they're now with their peers or they're with other managers, and they're afraid they have to have the right answer, and it has to be spoken downstream every time, and it has to be flawless. And I think the art in this is knowing when as a manager, when I've made a mistake, and how do I get out of it? Like, okay, how do I admit it? And then how do we change as rapidly as we changed the first time to correct that mistake? And I think we kind of lose that because we're afraid, right? I think sometimes managers are afraid to admit that they were wrong.
Absolutely right. So Jim, I love that. So you take it back to this place, and I call this is kind of the pressure valve that I see so much of it, and it really, I think when you consider an intervention spot, you just described it. So we've established the capacity for a local leader, any leader, to be able to endorse, right? So let's just keep that intact. Now the other word, and I mentioned this, is the capacity to advocate on behalf of their teams. And to your point, Jim, I think where fear, apprehension, anxiety shows up is our leaders creating this space, Jim. So go back to that conversation. We have our team leader, Matt Mosser. So we're all as managers having our conversation. Matt's there facilitating it. There's space inside that, though, where we can advocate on behalf of our teams. We can start to sense like, hey, where do we think our teams are going to struggle with this? Where do we think they're going to receive it? And collectively put that picture together. But also, more importantly, then, as we go out and have the conversation with our team, for the next discussion that we have, when we get together as a group of managers with Matt, is we're able to say, hey, you know what? Here's the feedback. Here was the reaction. Here are the key takeaways that our teams had. And so that ability for us to come back and, again, advocate on behalf of our team. Hey, it went great. They loved this aspect of it. Or you know what? Not everything was great. Thought I had this thing down. I think our strategy was well intended, but you know what? The feedback, the team really felt like the timing of this was off. Or you know what? The language came across a little tone deaf. Or maybe the decision itself could have used some revision, or here's some additional features that maybe would be available to us to, that now, think about this. Now as a team leader, I have the confidence that I can endorse on the behalf of the organization really effectively. But to your point, Jim, if there's a little course correction necessary in the reception of my team, you've also created space for me to advocate on behalf of my team. So now I can accommodate that translation spot that most team leaders need to be really excellent at, is I can do both and not feel like I'm in the middle of a tug of war and on the rope, right? And for managers, most of them in that pressure valve, they can't do either. And so now think about it. Expectations get shattered. Materials and equipment gets shattered. Opportunity to do everything now is up for grabs and likely not heading in a positive direction. And so now, play out the scenario, that impact that I have, the 59% level of engagement that's driven by having an engaged manager, we've given it away. I'm a not engaged manager, maybe an actively disengaged manager. I'm running for my life, and my team can pick up on every bit of that, and we lose the whole culture and organization in the process. So we have to win that space, endorse and advocate. Use whatever words you want to, but I'd love all of our coaching to just invade and fight for that real estate right there.
Mark in the chat room says, I see the challenge of that the managers of managers being pulled in multiple directions and are unable to really coach their managers.
Hmm.
Mike, we've talked about the expectation of unclear expectations,
Yeah.
Q1, like not knowing what's expected of me. I think do we see this at the manager of manager level? You would think it would be really clear, but is it?
No. Yeah, I don't think it's any more clear than it is for any other role, Jim. And I do, Mark, I see your comment. I love what you're saying because I do think there's more variables. If you think about, especially that mid-level manager, frontline supervisor, like their air traffic control capacity has to be dazzling. Some have more capacity for it than others, but that's a space where I think leaders, again, Jim, to your point, just have to know. I don't think we have to win everything, but the clarity of expectations, and we've seen this over and over again as a theme. Managers will tell you that they're not struggling with the amount of things that they're having to accommodate. Not that that's comfortable or easy, but that's far less the challenge than the competing priorities. And if we can help them understand, I'll play out the metaphor, that we're not necessarily saying no to some things. We're actually saying yes more slowly to some things. And how can you, Jim, as my leader, help me understand, hey, Mike, I know you've got these 15 things. They all need to get done. It's not a competition. Take these first 2 or 3 on, get them landed, and then I want the next, and so there's that subtle and nuanced approach to helping me just exhale and go do my job. But Jim, we would say if we help senior leaders do it, we're still talking about the same fundamentals of performance development that we've talked about throughout all of your other podcasts. We're still talking about one meaningful conversation per week. Doesn't have to be a heavy lift. Could be 30 minutes to 5 minutes. But if you think about it, if I'm a senior leader and if I'm truly held accountable to organizational outcome, I want to have the conversation with somebody who thinks that they can prioritize something more than the engagement strategy or the engagement influence and effect on the success of the entire company. So on the short list of things that they're paying attention to, engagement of their managers better be first or second. I'm kind of wincing as I say that because I don't know if I feel good about even allowing second place to be an option. Maybe it's first, right? So
I think some of this stems from a startup culture that we've celebrated here in the U.S. in particular, where the founders end up being the senior leaders, and they're great entrepreneurs. They may not be great people leaders.
Oh, great call. Great
right?
call. Mm-hmm.
Right. So that they get into these roles, and then it's so they continue to build out the company, but there's no direction or very little direction coming from that senior leadership of founders who are really good at starting things, but may not come to the table with these expectations that we talk about, the frustrations, especially in the area of development. Right. They're used to developing product, not people. And I'm not saying this is the case for all of them. And this is a big, broad stroke. So I don't want I'm not trying to jump to conclusions, but I'm just kind of thinking through I grew up in the Silicon Valley. I've seen how those things operate. I see what happens as these companies get big and those executive teams get replaced, or hopefully get replaced with people leaders. But Mike, as we think about then, if that's happening and our middle managers or our managers are not getting training, they're not getting opportunities to learn and grow, what kind of effect does that have from an organizational standpoint? Because we know that's a fundamental need as well.
Yeah, I don't. This will sound cliche, so you all have to bear with me. But I think we would all agree it's true. I don't know how leaders or managers can create anything on behalf of their teams if they're not consuming it themselves. So if we want to influence a culture of performance development, how does a manager actually do that if they're not being developed themselves? How does a man, so I think, again, as a point of accountability for every senior leader is, if you're frustrated with something that's not happening with and for your organization, maybe you ought to just reverse engineer it back and really do an audit of, well, how would that show up in the interactions and the evidence of the relationships that I have with the managers who report to me. So let's, if we play this on out, and George, I loved your call out in the chat about how many managers say they're not being supported or developed accurately or proficiently. There's, one of the features, Jim, that we like to highlight is that empirical nature. And I've got 4 data points that I think really just walk right through the door that George took us through. I'll put these up in front of all of us just to help guide the rest of our conversation forward. And again, I think these are great. Data can be recreational or it can be wildly productive depending on how it's used. I think what I would nominate these data points for all of you as coaches is I think they help hold those senior leaders that you're coaching accountable. That these data points are not productive or positive, and so as senior leaders, how do we make sure we're not part of these percentages? How do we actually shift our behavior and the output on behalf of our managers so that these things would not be true for us? But here's our 4 key numbers that I'd love to have us focus on as we continue to unpack our conversation. First number is 36%. Only 36% of managers strongly agree that they have a clear job description. So Jim, I would encourage, when we think about coaching conversations, and it's been really effective so far this year. I had a lot of leaders who part of their commitment is, you know what, I need to just sit down with my managers and go back and review the job description with them and just coach and have a conversation with it, because maybe I need to update this job description. Maybe there's a tension and a disconnect between somebody, a manager sitting down and looking at this thing on paper, but then also realizing I'm not doing 70% of this. Am I supposed to? Is that okay? And so how do we release that? Only 26% is the second data point. Only 26% say that their pay and incentives motivate them to do what is best for our overall organization. So we're not talking about pay as a transactional indicator necessarily in and of itself, but where does it align with philosophy? Where does it align with mission and purpose? Where does it align with culture and values? That's where pay becomes a really primary vehicle. So imagine the exposure here, Jim. So imagine a manager who, with clarity, passively or aggressively, I guess we could say, even if we open it up, doesn't really feel like their pay aligns. I wonder what kind of interactions they're having with their teams or team members around their own pay. Right. And again, we're picking up on all these clues all the way through. And I don't know if every manager at their most shallow moment in their worst week is holding back some words, right, that might malign some of the pay structures about how they feel about their own pay. It doesn't take much. We don't have to hear too much of the content of that conversation for us as a team to start to sell out as well, so to speak. So only 26%. Only 26% there. The next number that I'd like to have us lean into is only 34%. Or I'm sorry, not only, but actually 34% of managers would strongly agree that the demands of their job interfere with their family life. So now we're talking about, going back, Nate, to your point about this being Wellbeing Wednesday, how do managers create a well-being driven culture if they're struggling with it themselves? They could talk about it, but we're all seeing them, or we're all witnessing the struggle that they're having. Again, I don't think they're withholding their language or their points of reference as they think about the compromise they're having to make between the choices they have around doing their job well and maybe the toll that that's taking on their capacity to involve and interact with their family in a meaningful way. So again, only 34%, or I'm sorry, it's 34% strongly agree that the demands of their job interfere with their family life. So, and again, well-being, we talked about this the last time, Jim. I think let's just see if we can tell the truth here. I think every organization, most organizations probably used to hold well-being as kind of a luxury item or a nice thing to have and focus on. Yeah. And that got blown to smithereens in a pretty loud and clear way last year. So good to see the truth revealed there. But again, managers aren't experiencing this. So how do they create it?
I think we're going to see that number climb over the next couple of years. And I think, coaches, this is a clue to a question you should be asking your leaders.
That's great.
How much of your job is getting in the way?
Yeah.
Like, where is it interfering with your family? Because it's a discussion. There's no fix to this that's a perfect one size fits all, right? We need to kind of think about everybody's individual situation on it. But it's a great question to ask.
Yeah.
Is it how much of your job is interfering with your family life? And how important is that? Mike, in my case, my kids are all grown. They're mostly gone. For the one that's still here in the house is super low maintenance. Like, I can give 50, 60 a week easy. In fact, sometimes I do it voluntarily because I love what I do, right? but I'm in a totally different situation than a lot of the individuals I work with who have young families, right? Or they're doing, it's different, right? Maybe they have a parent that my brother just retired to take care of my mom. Right? I mean, he's just 50. I shouldn't say how old he is, I guess, in the public here. He's in his late 50s.
Yeah.
And his demands are even more different than mine.
Yeah.
He's taken it upon himself to be the caretaker for my mom, who's in, in her last couple of years. So I think that question for coaches is super important to dig into. So coaches, if you're not asking that question, that's a free one for you. Take it, embed it in the conversations you're having.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I think as coaches, and this is where I will go back. The Well-Being at Work book, Jim. And again, I'll lead with a bias, but you read it, you consume it, and you translate it from like, would I actually, or could I do the things that this book is saying? There is some phenomenal, like very practical and but very useful coaching advice around how do we, those well-being conversations can get a little dicey. I think we have to earn our way to have those types of conversations. And there's some really great takeaways in that Well-Being at Work book that can help leaders and managers have confident, well-being oriented discussions with the people that they are leading. And I think to your point, Jim, we have to acknowledge that. The world and the workplace intersect. It's always been that way. Now our research tells us in a very graphic light that it's true, and so our conversations have to shift accordingly.
What's that fourth number, Mike?
Yeah, so the fourth number, if we thought these others were really sad, this is the worst one. Like, I just can't even believe this number when I see it. But here we are. George, this is your fault. George took us. I just want to make sure it's on record that this conversation now has to just is the door that we're walking through that George opened. So here we are. Only 8% of managers would strongly agree that the performance reviews that they receive inspire them to improve. I'm not sure if we could come up with a more sad or desolate number, Jim, than that. I'll repeat it just to make ourselves feel worse. Only 8% of managers say the performance reviews they receive inspire them to improve. So again, Jim, how do I go on and move my team forward? And how do I even know what performance development looks like, right? How do I understand if performance development is to equip, improve, and inspire the growth of the people on my team, and in a way that shows up to better outcomes? I can read about it, but I don't know. I can't translate it because I'm not receiving it myself. 8%, only 8% strongly agree with that one feature. So again, some of these things I think are interesting, Jim, because they, on the surface, it might be like, well, we're talking about pay, just pay people more. Or we're talking about details in job descriptions, so just clean that up. But there's the conversation around it, and inside that, and this is what I love about this audience, that actually reveals where the right decisions, the right timing, and the right outcomes will all align for the right person. So,
well, the good news is, I think in the final moments we have left here, we've got some ways to help coaches, and we've been sprinkling those in. But Mike, as we kind of wrap up this series as well, and thinking about the manager experience, where can our coaches, or maybe you're a manager listening to this, what kind of things can you begin to do to start changing these numbers? Because this is not just doom and gloom. We're not here to be like, oh, the world sucks, you should get off. Right? We've got to do some things about this. So how can we arm our coaches and our managers listening to this to be able to start changing those numbers, Mike?
Yeah. So first and foremost, and this has been a really strong topic here as of late, is going back and thinking about, we talk about mission and purpose a lot, Jim, but I think, again, I'll challenge us, and I'll ask you to challenge the people that you all are coaching, is I think we in the past have probably approached mission and purpose as, and I'm going to use, Jim, one of your points of reference, as kind of a single dimensional kind of perspective, where it's a slogan that we've got some flashy branding around, and it's printed and it hangs on our wall. And heaven forbid, don't fall prey to the temptation of asking a senior leader or managers what that mission statement actually is, because they might be embarrassed, and you might be in some an uncomfortable situation for exposing the fact that they actually couldn't recite their mission statement. But if we were to make it, to Jim's point, to one of your points of reference earlier, is making it three-dimensional, I really wonder and I've kind of been challenging myself on this lately, is how often do I actually talk about or reference our mission and purpose synonymous with client and customer in a normalized approach with my team or with my organizations, not as a grand statement, but as a authentic point of reference to, hey, we do this because the why behind this is because the why behind our mission and purpose, client and customer. And so for leaders, as they transmit that, ask the leaders that you're working with, how often are they actually authentically integrating those reference points around the why behind the organization, the why behind the customer is the why behind our role and how it's necessary and vital every single day. And I think there's a great connection there that would be really useful.
Mike,
Go ahead, Jim. Jump in.
Such a great reminder, because even our own, at Gallup, we believe we're the analytics and advice for everything that matters. Mm-hmm. And I bring that to this community, right? It's what are we doing today? We're talking about analytics and advice for things that matter. But I don't know if I say that enough probably to the community, right? I don't know if I had asked the community that listens to this, what do you think are what some of the values, some of the corporate values that we live by from it? That's a purpose statement, right? So even in my role, I probably have some opportunities. And is it as simple as kind of framing it up that way, to say it kind of often, to remind folks like, this is what we do, and our values are holding true to this, and this is why we're doing this? Is it that simple?
Yeah, it is. Our coaching really operationalizes those values in the exchanges and interactions that we have. So, I think there's some really pragmatic discussions asking people, so where in your role do you feel our mission and purpose most directly? How would you describe our mission and purpose in your own language? Who have you noticed on our team that you think really represents and models the behaviors and actions that we would associate with our mission and purpose most vividly? So it starts to kind of create this bandwidth. And again, Jim, to your point, now it's three-dimensional, because now I'm starting to think about, it's not words, it's behaviors and actions. And I see it in Jim, and I'm connecting it now to my role. And so now there's really not a day where I come in that with intentionality, I shouldn't be mindful about the fact I'm adding value. That somewhere out there is a client customer that's fulfilled through our mission and purpose. Their success is vital. They don't have the luxury of us just surviving and just getting by as an organization, because if we resign ourselves to that, then they're going to fail. And now their future is compromised, or they're going to find somebody else that can help them, actually succeed in a way that we were unable to, or unwilling to, maybe, in that. So
I get asked the question all the time. We've been doing these webcasts now for 8 years, which is pretty crazy, Mike. I mean, 2 years short of a decade. It's been an amazing run so far on this. And people say, how do you keep doing it? And I say, well, I have the best. I have the best supporting staff of anybody on the planet. It's just I'm developed in it. I'm given resources for it. I have great opportunities to spend time with you. Imagine if we began to kind of think of those, if my job is to communicate, to collect analytics and give advice to the world for everything that matters. And we're doing this through you. How great is it that I'm given the resources I need, the time, the people to be, and it's not perfect. I can't I get you for 7 weeks a year now, as opposed to, maybe 20 before. But it is provided, and that is incredible. That allows me to keep doing this for 8 years. And so I really do, as we think about that, I really do think there's great opportunities to think from our managers of managers to think through, am I providing the support, the incentives, the expectations, right? Oh, hey, newsflash, that's the exact same thing our employees need. Right?
Yeah. It's just translated to a different source to a different space, but the fundamentals where proverbial winning and losing shows up is still based around the same level of interaction. Yeah.
What else, Mike, as we think in the few minutes we have left?
Yep. Couple other points I'd love to have the group think about. Again, this is just plays perfectly to this audience. I do think we need to help leaders continue to reestablish and look at what succession, or who needs to ascend and take on different roles a little differently. You all know this, but it's far less necessary about their subject matter expertise, their skills or knowledge, as it is, can they build a great team? Can they just continue to grow and build out great teams regardless of the size? Or, they may start off leading a team of 5. Can they lead a broader team of 15? Can they then roll up to a unit level and still build a great team, a division and build a great team, an organization and still build a great team? And you'll see this notion of building a great team. It's still that comfort level, and this is where you'll start to see a little separation, and this is where engagement tells the truth, is where the leaders start to have an expansion of their bandwidth or show a restriction of their bandwidth relative to their capacity to engage and work through others and do less of it necessarily themselves, or can they literally transmit all the way through larger populations? And so I think if you start off with that criteria, are we moving the best leaders forward in the capacity to build teams? And again, whether that's strengths and or engagement, where are we seeing the evidence of that? Or is the answer to performance always just that person? Which again, that's not bad, but there's going to be a cap to that, and that's fine. We just need to, at that point, just have that person, reside there and be excellent. But others who move on, right, how much broader can they cause that audience of performance to show up?
That does, Mike, speak a little bit to the intentionality of hiring managers to be managers. In other words, right? Yeah. We talk a lot about this, so we won't dwell on this here, but in our selection, as we think about the work of hiring those folks who have the right talent to be managers, identifying that talent, and it's different than taking your best salesperson and making them the sales manager.
Right.
So we won't belabor that point, but it does speak to that, right? Of getting people who have those natural thoughts, feelings, behaviors that lead to great managing, doing their job of managing, right? And there are folks who are good at it. We know that. And there are many that are not. And so I think that's important to know in that place.
Yeah, that's where I think Q12 becomes such a great diagnostic, Jim. I think you'll see it. You'll see, and it's not the size that predicts the engagement. It's the manager that predicts the engagement through whatever size group that they lead. So we've got these great testimonies. One of my favorite leaders I ever worked with, Jim, is that she had a group. She had 69 people on her team. There was no managers, supervisors in between her and 69 people. She was like a 4.9, 4.93 on her grand mean score for all 12 questions, right? Defied stereotypes, defied math. She was just a great leader that knew how to involve herself and to bring out the best of her team across 69 people. So a really impressive number, and there's a lot more. The story there is just, it's the talent of the leader that transmits most effectively. But when we measure engagement, we can start to see leadership capacity show up because the engagement never falls off despite the size of the group that they're leading. Jim, one last point that I'll make in our coaching acumen to bring this all in for a landing. I want to go back to the point that I made earlier, and again, this is perfect for this group, is one meaningful conversation a week. And so, a lot of leaders are going to say, look, we're running for our lives. I've got an entire organization I have to worry about and hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and budget and things that I'm trying to manage. The sales pitch here, the area where we should help them be convinced that they can cause the best of those things to happen, is still back to the center of our conversation. Hey, if you've got all of these moving parts and variables, just shrink it down. If you win your manager, those things become symptomatic or byproducts of all of the success or challenge that you think you're facing right now. But commit, and just imagine, right? This goes back to the accumulation of the coaching between the leader and the manager. One meaningful conversation for each of those managers, the math multiplies there. But now just what they really need to do is do the math. How many of the team members that report to those managers now will be beneficiaries or the recipients of the best of what that conversation exchange looked like between leader and manager. So, we think about the frequency of those conversations. We think about well-being. We think about expectations. All those things can really, quite frankly, be transmitted. And I'll nominate 3 really simple points of reference that I think are effective. If leaders are struggling, well, I don't know the right questions that I want to ask, I would nominate these 3 that I think are really effective. If these are the 3 that you're left with, I think you could move everything you want to. But simply asking, if I'm a leader, simply asking the managers to report to me once a week, what's working for you, what's working against you, and what's next. I would contend that the wrap inside each of those 3 points of reference, I'm not sure where the conversation couldn't organically go that would produce really great outcomes, calibrate that manager to be at the best for their team, and really cause our organization collectively to win. What's working for us, what's working against us, and what's next, and just watch it go. So
those are three great questions.
I like them a lot. I wish I'd love to say that I came up with them, but I will tell you, I use them like they were mine. And so take them away. But I think it here, this is what coaches, what I love about coaches do so well is it's helping leaders and managers to help their intentions and their motive to qualify as a coach, right? And I think those 3 questions qualify me to be a coach, Jim. I can ask those 3 questions, and if my motivation is, really on point, it gives me a lot of content to do things with. I did see Lisa's, clarify what's next. So Lisa, what really helps us there is, and this is what's so strengths based, but we know when we're operating out of our weaknesses, we're reacting to things typically. Right, we're coming from behind on things, and when we ask managers, when leaders ask managers what's next, there's that future lean that operating out of our strengths really causes us to have in our posture and our approach towards what's our earliest indicator, or what's our canary in the coal mine approach towards what do managers think is out there on the horizon. What should I as a leader be thinking about that completes the feedback loop that manager might be representing their team with. So by asking managers what's next, you give them the space to pause and think like, oh yeah, you know what? I think my team might be needing this, or I'm starting to get the sense that there could be something out there in front of us that we could get to preemptively. And so it's a great feedback loop for a leader to have at their disposal, but it keeps that manager, I would say metaphorically, if we think about our athletic stance, on the balls of their feet rather than on their heels, constantly thinking futuristically and forward about solutions and opportunities, future challenges that we can make small things instead of big things. So yeah, that's the point of that what's next question.
Leading from the charge instead of from the retreat, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, super great. Mike, thanks for taking these last 4 weeks that we've had together here. A nice little package as we think about managers. A new manager report is on the horizon as we record this on May 26th. May 27th is the release of that new manager report. Many of you will be listening to this that we recorded weeks from now. And so the manager report is already out there and is available. And you can check that out as well. Austin and I spent a bunch of time talking about that last week on Called to Coach. And so lots of details around that. We'll have lots of information, lots of changes happening today and tomorrow on our sites to make all of that happen. But Mike, thanks for coming in and kind of preparing the soil, as I like to say, to not only be a supplement for the Q12 for Coaches series, but to kind of bring us up to speed on it's the manager work and now boss to coach, as we think about that, all those pieces in place to really begin to equip managers to make the work environment a better place, right? They control a lot of it. And so good stuff indeed. Mike and I are going to get an opportunity. We have 3 more sessions post summit that we're going to get together on, and we're putting the planning together for that right now. I'd love to get some feedback from you. If there's a topic or a subject you'd love to hear from Mike, send me an email, jim_collison@gallup.com. If you can't remember that, or you can't spell Collison right, send it to coaching. It's a tough one. coaching@gallup.com, and they'll route that to me so we can get it. We'd love to get a little bit of feedback from you and just kind of hear what you're kind of thinking, and maybe we can address that during that series. So Mike, thanks for doing this. Appreciate your time.
Jim, the only thing that would have made it better if it would have actually been on your birthday. That's your fault for not scheduling it.
I know.
But maybe you wanted to actually have a birthday.
It's a big enough day. It's a big enough day. It can live on its own. Awesome. With that, we'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we do have available now in Gallup Access. Go to gallup.com/CliftonStrengths and log in with your account. And man, we have a ton of resources that are available for you there, including a ton of engagement resources. I think, we speak to a Clifton Strengths dominated crowd, but we have a ton of engagement resources available inside Gallup Access. So that's actually why we built Access. Just a little secret there. We built it for engagement and added strengths to it. So if you're interested in coaching, master coaching, or you want to become a Gallup certified strengths coach, we do that as well. You can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, And just note that somebody will call you back with some information on it as well. If you want to keep up to date, like I mentioned, these 3 sessions that Mike and I have coming up, and you're like, how do I know when these things happen? You can follow us on Eventbrite. So go to gallup.eventbrite.com, BRITE on that one, .com. Follow us there, create an account, follow us there. You get an email whenever I publish anything new. Mike mentioned the summit that's coming up, or maybe I mentioned it, June 8th and 9th, maybe a little late if you're listening to this in the podcast form, but for those listening live, if you're not registered, we will miss you if you don't come. Gallupatwork.com. You can register for that 2-day event right now. All sessions are recorded, so if it's out of your time zone, we'll have it available for you when you wake up. Join us on any social platform by searching CliftonStrengths. And thank you for joining us today. We will get out of here. Oh, we're a little over. Get to your next meeting. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.